Paul. Yes. Where were you yesterday? He sounded casual at first, like he thought this was just another check-in. I was doing viewings like you told me, and last night I was at home. Why? I let him talk, let him hang himself with the rope of his own lies. Then I hit him with it. So why, on the doorbell camera, do I see you entering one of our properties at 9:30 last night? Not only were you alone, you brought at least 25 people with you. Boys and girls, music, drinks. The silence on the line stretched, then he tried it. The oldest trick. When was this? Don't play stupid with me, Paul. Don't. You went into one of our properties last night, without permission. Do you want to come clean and tell me what you were doing? He stammered, scrambled. Oh yeah, I was doing the viewing. No, you weren't. Don't insult me. If there'd been a viewing, I'd know about it. It would be on the system. There was no booking. What I saw was a party. Loud music, bottles, people falling over themselves, and I've already had 4 complaints from neighbors. His voice went high, panicked. No, it's just, they have a big family. That's why there was 30 people. Paul, I cut him off, my patience gone. I'm not interested in your stories. You were caught. On camera, lying to me again. And I'm done. He begged, tried to spin it into a misunderstanding, but I'd already made my choice. You're fired. Don't come back to the office. Return everything that belongs to us. Today. Goodbye. The line went dead, but my chest was still burning. What he'd done wasn't just reckless. It was dangerous. And it was only the beginning of what I'd uncover. Paul wasn't a stranger off the street. I'd known him for over a year. On paper, he was everything you wanted in an employee. Charming, confident, easy to get along with. He could walk into a room and have a landlord laughing within 5 minutes. Tenants trusted him, too. He had that effortless kind of charisma that you can't teach. But beneath that shine, there were cracks. Little things. The kind you brush off at first. Reports coming in late with flimsy excuses. Wi-Fi went down. My laptop froze. Small lies that felt harmless until you noticed how often they came. He'd skip steps on inspections, forget to log viewings properly, shrug it off like it didn't matter. Still, there were moments when he pulled through. Times he'd drive across town late at night to hand over keys, or stay on the phone with a tenant until their boiler clicked back on. He wasn't lazy. That was the problem. He knew how to work when it suited him, and he knew how to look like he was working when it didn't. I kept giving him chances. Maybe it was because I remembered the first few months when he showed up early, sharp suit, ready to prove himself. Maybe it was because he reminded me of younger me, rough edges, but capable of more. There was always this tug of war inside me. One side seeing Paul as a trusted member of the team, someone worth investing in. The other side whispering he was a walking red flag, a risk I was too stubborn to cut loose. And now, staring at those doorbell clips of him turning a company property into a nightclub, I realized which side had been right all along. The morning after I fired Paul, the phone started ringing. First it was one neighbor, then another. By midday, I'd logged 4 separate complaints, each angrier than the last. Your tenants had a rave in there last night, one man snapped. Music so loud my walls were shaking. I've lived on this street for 30 years and never seen anything like it. Another described bottles being smashed in the garden, strangers coming and going at all hours, taxis pulling up until nearly midnight. One even said a fight broke out on the pavement. I drove to the property myself, bracing for the worst. What I walked into made my stomach drop. The living room looked like the aftermath of a student house party. Empty cans and bottles scattered across the floor, sticky patches on the carpet where something sugary had spilled. The sofa had been shoved against the wall. A dining chair was cracked clean in 2. Upstairs, I found cigarette butts in the sink, as if someone couldn't even be bothered to walk to the bin. This wasn't some family viewing gone wrong, like Paul had tried to claim. This was deliberate, a full-blown party thrown in a property we were supposed to be protecting for the landlord. I stood in the middle of the mess, furious and embarrassed in equal measure. Neighbors were furious, my reputation was on the line, and the landlord hadn't even heard about it yet. It hit me then. Paul hadn't been careless. This wasn't about laziness or cutting corners. He'd treated the property like his own playground. He'd taken a company house and turned it into his personal nightlife venue. The lies weren't just excuses anymore. They were evidence of something bigger, something deliberate. And if he could do this once, what else had he been doing behind my back? Even after I told him he was fired, Paul didn't stop trying to spin his story. My phone lit up with texts, each one more desperate than the last. They were family, I swear. Big family. That's why it looked like so many. It was just a viewing, got out of hand. I didn't know they'd bring drinks. Come on, you know me. I wouldn't risk the company like that. Just one mistake. Reading them, I could almost hear his voice. Half panicked, half charming, that slippery tone he used whenever he was cornered. And I realized I'd heard it all before. The Wi-Fi was down when reports were late. The traffic was bad when he missed an appointment. The tenant's dog locked me out excuse when he skipped an inspection. Each lie dressed up as bad luck, each one just believable enough to let him slide. This wasn't new. It was the same pattern, just scaled up. A small lie stretched to cover a bigger one, then another on top of that. And every time I'd chosen to believe him because it was easier than facing the truth. The truth was this: Paul didn't just bend the rules, he lived in the cracks between them. I sat with the phone in my hand, scrolling through his messages. Part of me burned with anger at the mess he'd left, the complaints, the sheer arrogance of it. But another part of me felt something closer to sadness. Because underneath all the chaos, I could still see the guy I'd hired, the one who showed up early in a cheap suit, eager to prove himself, the one who stayed late to hand over keys, who once drove across town to calm down a panicked tenant, that Paul was still in there somewhere, buried under the lies. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't watching an employee make one mistake. I was watching someone unravel, one lie at a time. And if I let myself believe him again, I'd be complicit in his downfall. So, I put the phone down, let his excuses pile up unread, and forced myself to accept it. Paul wasn't going to stop lying. And I wasn't going to keep saving him from himself. A few days later, when the dust was still settling, one of the junior staff pulled me aside. He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure if speaking up was loyalty or betrayal. I didn't want to say anything before, he started, but I think Paul's been doing stuff on the side. My stomach tightened. What do you mean, stuff? He glanced around, lowered his voice. Unofficial viewings. At night, he'd bring people into the properties after hours, charge them a holding deposit. Cash. Said it was just to secure their interest before the paperwork. I stared at him, trying to make sense of the words. How many times? More than once, he said quickly. I didn't know the full details, but I heard tenants mentioning giving him money directly, and he bragged about it, like he had his own system, quicker than the office, said he was cutting out the middleman. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. The party hadn't been a mistake or a one-off lapse in judgment. It was the tip of the iceberg. Paul had been running his own little business under my nose, using company properties as his playground and piggy bank. Suddenly, all the little inconsistencies made sense. The missing reports, the strange gaps in the booking system, the neighbors claiming they saw groups going in when we had no record. He hadn't been sloppy. He'd been deliberate. I wanted to feel shocked, but mostly I felt sick. Because deep down, I'd known. The excuses, the charm, the way he always seemed to wriggle out of trouble. It all pointed to a man who thought rules were optional. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. Hearing it from another employee, though, stripped away the last shred of doubt. Paul wasn't just careless. He wasn't just reckless. He was a thief in a suit, moonlighting with the very assets I'd trusted him to protect. And that was the moment something inside me hardened. The sadness I'd felt before shrank into something colder. I wasn't dealing with a man who'd made a mistake. I was dealing with someone who had betrayed me and the company systematically for months. And whatever pity I had left for him died right there. The fallout came fast. Within a week, the phones in the office wouldn't stop ringing. One landlord was livid. I trusted you with my property, and you let some cowboy turn it into a nightclub? His voice cracked with anger, and all I could do was apologize, promise compensation, promise it would never happen again. Another investor sent photos. Broken chair legs, beer bottles stuffed into cupboards, cigarette burns on the carpet. This is what I'm paying management fees for? She demanded. Each call was a fresh punch to the gut. Years of building trust, years of proving we were reliable, could be undone by one man's lies. My company's name was being dragged through the mud because I hadn't cut him loose sooner. Meanwhile, Paul wouldn't stop. He kept texting like nothing had sunk in. "Please, just one more chance. I'll pay for the damages." They set me up. It wasn't like that. I can explain. "Don't let this one thing ruin everything I've done for you." I read them with a cold kind of detachment. A month ago, I might have believed him. I might have clung to the version of Paul who stayed late to fix boilers and charm tenants into renewing leases. But now, all I could see was the pattern, the excuses, the side hustle, the manipulation. It was like watching someone drown while still insisting they could swim. He didn't see the damage he'd done. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. The saddest part? A piece of me still wanted to reply, still wanted to hope he'd turn it around. But I knew if I gave him even an inch, he'd pull me right back into his chaos. So I left his messages unread, and for the first time since hiring him, I knew exactly who Paul was. A liability I couldn't afford. Just when I thought it was over, the call came. Not from a neighbor this time, but from the police. They asked about a disturbance at one of our properties. Weeks back, apparently. A fight had broken out late at night. Someone was injured badly enough to need stitches. Witnesses said it was during a party held at the address, my company's address. I felt my throat tighten as the officer read out the details. Music, shouting, bottles being thrown into the street. The kind of chaos that couldn't be brushed off as just a viewing. It was serious. The landlord's insurance company was now asking questions. And the worst part? All roads led back to us. Our property, our keys, our responsibility. When I tried to explain, to tell the officer that the man responsible no longer worked for us, that he'd abused his position and been fired, it didn't matter. The damage was already done. On paper, it was still our name attached to that house. I tried calling Paul, of course, straight to voicemail. His number eventually stopped ringing altogether. He'd vanished. No texts, no explanations, no attempt to clean up the mess he'd left behind. So it was me left to face the music. Me apologizing to landlords, me absorbing the costs, me sitting in meetings trying to defend our reputation, while investors looked at me like I was reckless for trusting him in the first place. The fallout wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was legal risk, financial liability, damaged relationships I'd spent years building. And it all came down to one man who thought he could turn company property into his personal playground, and then disappeared when it all caught fire. When the dust finally settled, I sat in my office late one evening, staring at the files stacked on my desk. Years of work, late nights, weekends sacrificed, every ounce of energy I'd poured into building a business I could be proud of, nearly undone by one man's lies. It wasn't just the party. It wasn't just the bottles on the carpet, or the neighbors shouting down the phone. It was the pattern. The small excuses I let slide, the corners I pretended not to see him cutting, the charm that made it easier to forgive than to confront. I realized, with a sick sort of clarity, that I'd ignored the red flags because I wanted to believe in him. Because believing in Paul was easier than admitting I'd hired someone who didn't care about the damage he caused. That was my mistake. And now I had to carry the cost, rebuilding trust with landlords, answering hard questions from investors, patching a reputation scarred by someone else's recklessness. The legal mess would fade, the bills would eventually be paid, but the scars on the business and on my own judgment would take longer. Paul vanished into thin air. Maybe he's still out there, telling someone else his smooth little lies, spinning another story. But I don't waste energy on him anymore. He made his choices, and I've made mine. He thought it was just a party. I thought he was just careless. But in the end, it wasn't just one night. It was everything he was hiding all along. And now I know better than to mistake charm for character.